Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar, Connected, Stronger and Smarter. So the impact of IoT SIMs on businesses. I'd first of all like to thank you all for joining us. I know how busy your schedule is going to be. So in today's session, we're going to keep it really relevant for you, full of useful insights, and hopefully you can take something away from the session today that sparks an interest in your business. So before we do deep dive into today's session, my name's Sam. I'm the head of mobile at Global 4, and I'll be guiding you through today's session. I'm joined by Jenny and Rich, who are two IoT specialists from Giacom, who we work very closely with and work closely with businesses across multiple sectors to help get them more connected, efficient and secure. So this is going to be a really relaxed interview styled session today where we'll explore what IoT SIMs are, how businesses are using them, how to deploy them effectively, and most of all, making sure that they are secure as well. So there's going to be a Q&A session right at the end of the session. So as we go on through the session today, feel free to drop any questions in and we'll have a look at the end and then we can address them. So let's keep it really simple today with the start off in terms of a foundation for an IoT SIM with a simple explanation and what an IoT SIM actually is and why it's different. So the term IoT might sound more technical than it is, but it's a lot more straightforward than you may think. So it's already been used by thousands of businesses up and down the country, across the globe, in fact, in the background to keep devices connected, to automate processes, and to streamline operations. Rich, thank you so much for joining today. To keep it really, really simple, how would you describe what an IoT SIM is in a straightforward way that makes sense to somebody who might not know or might not come from that technical background?
I guess to keep things really, really simple, you could say an IoT SIM is a way of delivering a connection to the internet from an IoT device. That's its most simple basis. If you go
Yeah,
a slight layer down on that, you'd say an IoT SIM card is a specialized type of SIM card, and it's designed to connect an IoT device to cellular networks, enabling them to transmit data and communicate. And that's the important thing. We're talking about utilizing cellular networks, of which there are 4 in the UK. And we're using a specialized type of SIM card. It's not the one off the high street. And I think we'll probably pick that up a bit later as well.
yeah, no, I agree. It'll be really good to dive into why it is different. So kind of looking at that as a high level to start, how is a IoT SIM different to what we will find in our day-to-day mobile phones? How does it differ?
Yeah, so your standard day-to-day mobile phone will be on a single network. It's a consumer style package on a consumer APN. You'll use it for data predominantly nowadays, but you'll probably get unlimited voice and unlimited SMS as part of that package because that's historically how humans have used phones and how they interact with them. That's not how an IoT SIM is created. There's no unlimited this, unlimited that as a standard. What you do is you would build a solution for that device. So it might be a small amount of data. It might be 1 or 2 text messages to wake a device up once a month, but that's how you build it. And then after that, you start looking at probably the layers upon that. So we talked about a standard mobile phone SIM as a consumer APN. That's one that everyone uses. If we're all using O2, we're all using the same consumer APN. We put that SIM into that device. It typically finds the consumer APN for you without having to enter anything, and you just go straight out onto the internet. But it's a bit of a dirty pipe if you consider connectivity as a whole. So really, when we look at IoT SIMs, we start saying we're looking at a private APN. We're looking at something that gives you a separate lane on the motorway from just your normal consumer traffic. But then you can also start adding more and more complexity to it. Things that you would associate with your connected, your physical Ethernet connections. So static IPs, public and private, APNs, those kinds of things. So you can add all of those capabilities in there, VLANs, your VPNs, all that complexity is available within an IoT SIM. And that's where you really start seeing the difference between your standard high street consumer mobile SIM and an IoT one.
Amazing. Some really good points covered there, which will come on to the more technical things a little bit later on. So you spoke around the four major networks in the UK, and you spoke about that kind of multi-network access. But why is connecting to all of these networks with one SIM card so powerful? What makes it really stand out?
I think there are probably two strands. One is that no network in the UK has ubiquitous coverage. It just doesn't happen. We're quite a hilly country in a lot of places, and it's quite sparse areas. And when we look at all the reports from the networks, they'll talk about population coverage, 99 point whatever percent population coverage. When we look at geographic coverage, then it's a different thing. You know, you're talking of high 70% to mid to high 80% coverage. So you're talking of somewhere between 25, at max, 25% of the UK isn't covered by one of the four UK networks. When
Wow,
you're looking at deploying across the UK into whatever it is. It could be a parcel courier force, and they have to travel all around the UK. If you're relying on one single network and you know that in almost 25% of the country this won't work, would you really want to push that out and guarantee that it's going to be a workable solution for your fleet out there? That's the problem you encounter. You know that driving around there will be problems. On top of that, you could have localized cell tower issues. If you're relying on one single network, you will have a problem. You will have a blackout in that area and you won't be able to use it. So the
really
benefit
powerful.
there is that you can start using the other networks. And I think that's probably the second point. You've almost got your network of choice because the device will allow you to join any of those networks, and it makes the call. It looks for the one with the best signal. It joins that network and stays on there until it loses a connection to give you the best experience.
Amazing.
Um, but if it can't, it could look again and then join the new best network that's available. So you've almost got like a backup, and you're driving around with a backup. You could think of like a really crude analogy of driving around a van, and you've basically got a BT line permanently connected to it, and a Virgin line permanently connected to it, and an other line connected to it. And
Yeah,
if you, it's really hard to equate to sometimes when you're looking at fixed versus mobile. But that's it. You've got a backup wherever you go of at least one or two other networks.
of course. Sounds really powerful. And thank you for giving that kind of overview of being able to connect to all of the networks in geographically the strongest place. I think it does certainly offer the opportunity for people who are traveling to be able to connect to the best network, whether that be on a train or whatever it may be, which we'll cover in a moment. So, and I guess very quickly to summarize on this section, Rich, how are businesses using multi-network connectivity to support things like remote staff, for example, or as I've just mentioned, people who are traveling frequently with iPads, with dongles? So how businesses really utilizing that?
So I was looking at this with the amount of deals that are done as well, and I would say high 80s to low 90s% of all deals that are done now require more than one network. When you look at RFPs that come through, people want to know that they've got access to more than one network. And that's great because historically, people didn't really understand about getting access to all four networks on one SIM without having to do loads of changes and crazy clever things at the edge. There's none of that's needed. This SIM has the capability of doing it. More recently, you know, it's becoming part of an RFP question. You must be able to provide me this. This is my bare minimum requirement because as IoT connectivity becomes more commonplace and more part of standardized infrastructure, people start learning this. So when we talk about businesses, I think it's everywhere, whether
Mm,
it's parcel delivery people, whether it's people who work in construction, in education. The go-to now is utilizing multi-network connectivity because they know that they can't always get on with just one connection.
so powerful. Really, really good analogy there. And it kind of flows nicely into our next section, which we'll look at in a second. But from what I've taken from what you've mentioned there, an IoT SIM offers smarter connectivity, wider coverage, obviously for geographical locations, better flexibility, and it's a lot more powerful than the standard SIM is what I've just learned from there. What I wanted to have a look at now is the real world cases on how people are actually putting that into practice. And IoT is everywhere, and we don't even think about it when we walk down the street. We walk past a traffic light. There's an IoT SIM in some of them now. What the councils are doing in lampposts, recycling bins, vending machines. We're surrounded by IoT, and we don't actually realise it. So before we jump into obviously the examples of how that looks, Jenny, just to bring you in there, how do you help somebody to understand the idea, of IoT being everywhere around us without being too over technical?
Yeah, so most people wouldn't necessarily live their daily life and be aware of all the things that they pass by that can be powered by smarter data. As you mentioned, we're absolutely surrounded by it, it's everywhere. Each of you will sit here within your own verticals, and regardless of whether that's hospitality, retail, construction, and property, there's a real constant stream of enhancing technology that's designed to strengthen a supplier's service and really improve customer experience.
Fantastic. Okay, so what I'm taking away from there is obviously it's not really vertical dependent, is it? It can really help anybody in any kind of
absolutely
scenario,
everywhere.
which obviously we can go into in a moment more. So, Rich, so what are some of the most common impactful ways companies are using IoT SIMs with the way the things we've just covered right now? Not the future on how that looks, but how are businesses using it in an impactful way as we look today?
It's incredible, the explosion of IoT, and the amount of SIMs that are sold for these kinds of things just increases month on month. And I think impactful. I mean, if you look at common, well, common would be payment devices, EPOS. You know, whether you're on a plane, whether you're in a retail environment, whether you're at a sports ground, whether at your gym, wherever you are, you know, you use a payment device. People don't really think about it now. You use a device to pay with Apple Pay, or you get your credit card out and you tap something. A lot of the time, there are now rules in place around whether that device is connected when that transaction happens. And if that transaction happens when the Ethernet has gone down, the actual responsibility and the person who ends up paying for that transaction is the retailer if they can't transact immediately around it. So it doesn't happen for everyone, but those are some of the rules in place now around retail specifically. So you talk about common, I would say payment is a massive one as we've become a very cashless society. Then you look at probably societal issues. So, you know, body cams because of theft, shoplifting, things like that have exploded, and the usage of body cams with untamperable footage because it's uploaded straight to the cloud via an IoT SIM connectivity is massive. Then you look at um, impactful because of PSTN switch off and how, you know, everything from traffic lights to street furniture that needs to have a connection is being connected in this way now. So as Jenny said, it's across every vertical, and I think it sometimes depends on the person when you look at impact as to how impactful it's been to you. You look at during COVID, a lot of students were at home, and so they had to provide connectivity at home. I was involved in a project where it was for tackling digital poverty, and we managed to keep 100,000 children connected to their teachers, to their peers,
Wow.
and to education services. And a lot of this was to do with providing an unsteered multi-network SIM to connect to any of the networks, but also providing the right level of protection around it, so the children couldn't do things that were nefarious or untoward, things they shouldn't be doing. You know, but you could access Google Classrooms and you could access those kinds of things. So, you know, that was really impactful for children, for education in that time frame. Right now, I would say PSTN switch off is probably a very impactful thing. We don't think about it so much, apart from all the messages we see about PSTNs being switched off, but we might not think, oh, that means all of the cash machines have to be connected in a different way now. All of the traffic lights, as I mentioned already, have to be connected in a different way. Healthcare, lone worker devices, things for measuring people who live in assisted living buildings typically connected by PSTN. So impactful, I'd say it plays into PSTN. Common, I'd say it's everything around you. I've probably got more examples, but those are the ones that just come off my head immediately.
No, there's some really good examples there. Thanks, Rich. And I know we spoke on the impact of the PSTN and what that looks like for businesses. Is there any kind of verticals that are benefiting more from IoT, whether that be like retail, utilities, or whatever, however that looks? Is there any verticals that are really taking off with IoT that are seeing a real big impact that's having that kind of dominoes effect?
I'd say all of them, pretty much every vertical we could take examples from and show you value, whether it's keeping the lights on because of PSTN or whether it is, monetarily beneficial. I've been able to measure this. Because I've been able to measure this, I've saved this. And so typically we'd look at verticals specifically because we could probably give a use case for every vertical that we could have thrown at us. Aviation, construction, education, healthcare, they all have these both common and impactful benefits from IoT.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So we're already seeing how IoT is bringing value to different sectors, as Rich has just covered. What I really want to look at is what impact does that have day to day? We've spoke about the PSTN switch off lone workers, but in a day-to-day running of a business, what kind of impact is that having, and what does that look like for businesses? And that's what we're going to look at next. So, Rich, what kind of companies see the biggest impact, but not only that, save time, money, or even reducing risk? So we've looked at the impact on what that has, but what about saving time, being more efficient, or getting a return on investment from looking at that kind of topology, or even reducing the risk, as we've kind of looked at with the analogy you give us with the children connecting to devices? So where are we seeing the biggest impact? Is it time, money, reducing risk? How does that look?
I think depending on the IoT solution, really depends on which one of those metrics is hit greater. So if you take a big business, a big high street retail company, their biggest impact might be around shoplifting right now. And so that comes into two areas, which are reducing risk because it's problems for their staff. It causes stress for their staff. It causes lots of other issues, as well as the actual act of shoplifting. So when they start taking these cameras to protect the staff, to have video evidence, you may not stop the actual shoplifting event itself. And a lot of staff members are being told not to get involved because it can lead to problems.
Yeah, of course.
But you're reducing risk because people now know things are being recorded. They will be held up in a court of law, and you are the retail environment is showing something that they're doing to help their frontline workers in that scenario. When you look at construction, you'd probably be talking, construction can be a small site or it can be a large site. If you look at large sites, they've got a lot of policies around who can come into what gates, how people can take in and out equipment. So many of these things now have IoT SIMs, and it's crazy. I went to an event not too long ago, and you find there's barriers like turnstile barriers at football grounds, but they actually have them for a lot of the construction venues now. And so they're using those because they can measure when people are in and out. They're reducing risk and meeting their health and safety criteria by having these things in place. If you look at time and effort, this goes to everything from some SMBs upwards, because everyone wastes time doing certain processes. I remember speaking to a company that was starting out looking at live displays in buildings. So these are trees and flowers and things that make buildings much nicer. So any kind of living thing that needs to have certain things measured to make sure that it's getting the right nutrients. So it's a tree, and you need to look at the nitrates and the different makeup of the soil. They were sending people round. So there was a guy in a van who was driving around and seeing these, or a few guys in vans. And the trouble was they were driving around and it would be absolutely fine. And then you'd have 2 weeks of really hot weather and it would be in an atrium and the tree would be obliterated by the time the person came round and almost beyond saving. By putting these devices in, they were measuring the impact of the weather or the environment that they were in on the actual plant. And so they could get a report back showing the immediate issue, and they could then send someone out strategically based upon the information they had, not just driving around to visit all of the locations. For me, it's a bit of an upgrade on the example that people used to talk about, like from the day dot, which was vending machines and filling them, and everyone always taking around like too many Snickers or Mars bars or Lion bars or whatever it was, and never having the right thing. Everyone needed Ribena in this one for some reason, and they didn't have any. But for me, this one was only in the last year, and it just shows you as people need to move back into buildings, they need to entice people by them looking beautification of buildings and having these live walls and environments. But you waste time, and if you can save time and money by creating an environment where you can get information from the edge back into somewhere, you can analyze it and you can make sure that the person you've got goes to those locations because they're aware of a change. You save time because of the person going around, you save money because you're not replenishing stock all the time from dead trees and plants. And so, yeah, I'm just thinking of a couple like of examples that really hit kind of like the small to medium kind of businesses and then the larger retail ones right now.
Oh, absolutely. And that's a really good analogy of how that is saving time, it's saving money, it's saving wear and tear on vehicles, it's helping the workforce to become more efficient from what you are saying there. In terms of looking at things like PDQ machines, which is a really simple fix. So if there's a machine that's got a Vodafone SIM card in there, for example, and the mass goes down in the local area, kind of thinking of them kind of examples, a little bit more simple, if you'd like to say, what other things can IoT and SIMs solve in that kind of day-to-day running of a normal business?
I think when you start looking at people needing to have backup, historically people might have taken two PSTN lines and then discovered that actually they meet in a conduit almost just outside the building. And so when the first one went down, the second one was also drilled through or broken. And so a lot of people will start taking an over-the-air cellular IoT connection as the backup, because if the primary goes down, they've got this one and they can just pass the traffic over that route instead. So we've seen a lot of that where people have changed their behavior. And with the cessation of PSTN, that's becoming sort of the go-to. I'll buy an Ethernet line and my backup will be over the air. Then they've adopted that and looked at sort of site rollouts and those kinds of things. So you'll know better than me. A lot of the time I hear people saying, I've ordered an Ethernet line and there's a 6-month waiting list, a 3-month waiting list, or whatever it is. But I actually need to open the store in 2 months now, and people will be in there working from that time frame. So where IoT has probably pivoted slightly more recently is that it's not just the small data, the bits of information about nitrates and soil levels. It's all around massive data where you're suddenly powering the CCTV for the new store opening or the entire infrastructure for a new office opening. And so the benefit of 5G and delivering a solution that can be put into a temporary location, but give you a comparable connection to an Ethernet line with the bells and whistles of public static IP and things like that, should they be required, is a significant jump forward and a more recent development of probably what traditionally IoT was geared for.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with you. And it's quite convenient that our next section is going to look at how sites can get up and running quicker than waiting for an Ethernet line to be installed, or using it as that kind of backup solution, which we can dive into more. But looking at the impact we've just discussed, clearly from what I'm reading there is that the right IoT setup can solve problems quite quickly. But as we've just touched on, one of the fastest growing use cases is we're seeing around site rollouts and temporary locations. We spoke about construction sites and pop-up sites. Businesses don't want to necessarily commit to a fibre line there or a lease line if they're unable to get it. So, which does lead us nicely into rapid deployment. So when there's a new site opening, as I've mentioned, whether that's in construction, whatever the field is, and there's a delay on the lease line or businesses can't afford to sit still, how would you say, Rich, that businesses are using IoT SIMs, going more into it as you've just specified, to solve this kind of issue? So maybe thinking about stuff like the rapid deployment with a site opening or that temporary pop-up site. How businesses utilising IoT for that?
So one you just mentioned, construction, is quite interesting because for a lot of them, they're on a 12-month time frame for a build out, maybe 18 months, maybe 6 months. For a lot of them, ordering a line and waiting for that time frame to get a fixed line in when they know that it's not going to be viable beyond month 18 because they'll be gone, it doesn't add up anymore, the cost
Yeah.
and the rigidity of that solution. And so a lot of the time now they will go to a router plus connectivity that they can take from site to site. All they need to do is power it. They need to be aware of what's available in the location it's being deployed in, but you've got a rapid kind of deployment where you can put a SIM out there. I see quite a few 5G SIMs now on anything from 200 to 500 meg connection. And so you're putting that up in a location and your CAD drawings and all the things you need to do within that location can be transferred quite happily across that. That's construction. If you look at retail, whether it's new coffee shop opening or anything else, because of those delays for those kinds of lines, they want to be able, they've got a target date for opening, and it would used to be that if there was a delay, then everything was delayed. But people can now move forward with this kind of connection. So again, you've got some kind of smartish device, which is effectively your hardware, your router, your SIM card, plus potentially public static IP because of either CCTV requirements or PSTN requirements or VoIP or whatever it is. So you can add all those things and you can deploy it in a matter of days to a location. And for me, that's fantastic because you need these capabilities to bridge the short-term connectivity gaps. And that's exactly what it's geared for now. It's cost effective and it's also perfect for timing.
So powerful, really, really powerful. And you spoke around having an IP address on there for things like CCTV cameras or printers, whatever that might be, and being able to deploy that out within a couple of days, opposed to waiting weeks or even months for an Ethernet cable to go in or whatever that topology may be. It's so powerful. How about flipping that on its head? Let's take an example of a business who's got a 100 meg lease line, and that is their primary connection. They don't have any kind of backup in place at the moment. They have explored the avenue of looking at a secondary lease line, which is coming out at £250 a month, £300 a month, whatever that price may be. What other options are there? And you can see where I'm going with this. How does IoT bridge that gap in being able to keep a business secure and also be up and running in the event of failure? Because we're seeing the market trend move now to more cloud-based applications. If we rewind 10 years ago, everything was on site. Everything's going to the cloud now. So the point I'm making is businesses are becoming even more dependent on that kind of connectivity. So it's a very long way of asking, in the event of a failure for a site who doesn't have a secondary lease line, but could potentially have this on site, how does that work? How does it look?
I think the thing you'd immediately ask is, given that being connected is, aside from the stock you have to actually sell if you're in retail, being connected is the most important thing for a store. I remember during COVID, I was saying that connectivity is probably the second most valuable thing nowadays. We talk about electricity, gas, water, stuff like that. I would say that electricity and internet connectivity are the two most important things, because I can go online and order bottles of water from Amazon to arrive at my house in 30 minutes or something, but I can't go online if I have no electricity or internet.
Of course, yeah.
And so this is where we need to get to this mindset of internet is the most important thing. Connectivity is the most important thing for you, outside of electricity in your stock. So if you haven't got a backup for it, are you willing to take that risk that it's that important that you're so the question would be, why not take one of those devices I just talked about? Why not take a router plus a SIM card in one of them different wraps and have that stored in a cupboard for emergency use? So there's a cost and it carries on charging you that cost each month, but it's not as expensive as the lease line that you will only use once in a blue moon. But you've got that guarantee there that you've got something that's ready to go immediately that can be actually away from your other infrastructure. And the reason I mentioned that is because we had an incident last year where a partner's customer had gone offline because of a critical attack, and they had to get their locations. They had 5 key sites they had to get back up and running, but they didn't want anything touching their infrastructure because they had to fix what had gone on and understand what had been damaged. So they used this, they ordered those, they got them deployed to those locations and got their business up and running again whilst they fixed the issue. And that's a real life use case example of something that can happen. The amount of investment people have in security nowadays because of these cyber attacks that happen. But when a cyber attack does happen, what is your way to keep the business running? Where is your infrastructure that is separate to your standard connectivity infrastructure? And this is where it's perfect, because it just can sit on a shelf in a cupboard until it's needed. And you decide how many you need for the critical locations, and you just put it out and turn it on, and you've got connectivity.
Really powerful. And you've spoke about cybersecurity there, which I know is at the forefront of every director's mind, every business owner, every IT director's mind, because it's so up there at the moment. And cybersecurity has actually overtaken most domestic crimes now, which opens up a conversation to ensuring that we've got the correct connectivity there in the event of a failure, or unfortunately in the event of a cyber attack, have you got a separate network that we can go onto? And these are the kind of things that IoT can start to bridge the gap on. So when time is critical, IoT, from what we've just discussed there, can obviously keep operations moving, but with more devices connecting, the next big focus, as we've just highlighted, is making sure that they're not just deployed correctly, that they're secure and they're managed effectively. So one thing I want to look at is obviously smart deployment and security. Rich, a little bit more technical than we've started off here, but I think it's important to look at the security element of IoT SIMs, because I guess if anybody on the call today is potentially thinking about making that jump to IoT, one of the questions that's probably coming up is, how secure is it? So what role does always available multi-network connectivity or IoT SIMs helping IT teams to maintain visibility and making sure that they've got control over the connected devices? So what role does that always available role look like?
I think always available is the key point here, because depending on the device, it might not always want the internet, but it needs to be there for when it needs to be used. And that's what's so important, because depending on what is at the edge, if it's CCTV, I need to be able to log into it. I need to be able to understand what's going on. I need to be able to get a copy of that footage. If it's critical infrastructure or payment devices, I need to know that when it needs to do a transaction, then it needs to be able to do it. So always available is a beautiful blend with multi-network connectivity, because I can't guarantee to you that the cell tower that is delivered by one of the 4 networks that's right outside that's connected to at this moment in time is actually going to be working at the time when you need it for getting that CCTV footage. But what I do know is that if you've got a multi-network SIM, I've got the ability to join another one of the 4 UK networks. So when we talk about that having a backup for you, I've got that relief that, okay, O2's down now, but I can use Vodafone, or okay, EE's down now and I can use Vodafone. Whatever the option is, I've got that. So I think that's the big distinction. I can't do that with a fixed line. I can't go, oh, I'm just going to be able to swap it over to another provider now. It doesn't work in that way. That is one of the beauties of over-the-air connectivity.
Amazing. It's again coming back to that disaster recovery plan, isn't it? Of having that multiple failover and not being bound to one network. It's really, really powerful. And staying on the topic of security, how does this type of connectivity help make sure that devices are meeting security requirements essentially, and before they're allowed to connect? How does that look?
So I think looking at an IoT solution, the first thing is that when I put the SIM in, I need to put an APN in because it's using a private APN. That's tick one on security for me. I'm not going to the high street and buying an O2 SIM from the O2 store, shoving it in and just letting it do its thing, because I've got to the point where security is a bit of a thing in my head, and I'm thinking, if I'm using this and it's just a consumer APN that any device can join automatically, and it's taking all this other traffic, how secure is that? Am I confident enough that that is giving me the right level of security for my product, for my business? And I'm happy to hang my hat on it, especially when you're talking about, someone in the C-suite who has the responsibility to tick a box and say, this is compliant with our rules and regulations around internet security. Therefore, for me, you've probably got two or three things that you would immediately tick off. And you say, why am I using a consumer SIM? I think I said to you when we were talking a while ago about that analogy of going to the public library and logging on to your Hotmail back in the day, and then just kind of getting up and walking off and looking at a book or something, and then coming back and signing out, and oh yeah, I've got to remember to sign out, or just walking off and not signing out and forgetting about that. And we've kind of, hopefully most of us have grown up nowadays to the point where we don't do things like that.
You'd
But
hope.
we still buy a consumer SIM and we don't think, oh, what about the security implications here? So that's probably step one. Step two would be, if I need a static IP, does it need to be public? Because I am now publicly broadcasting something. Can I look at doing this on a private static IP? Is there a way that I can manage my environment so that that benefits me more? Because actually that's slightly more secure. Maybe I need to look at VPNs. Maybe I need to look at how the infrastructure works, and really just look at it in a bit more detail than going, I'm going to pop down to the shop, buy those SIMs, shove them in, job done. Because that is not meeting security.
No, of course. And I think the assumption probably is because we're buying that from a high street retailer that it's going to be secure, when in fact it's potentially compromising stuff even more. So are we seeing businesses start to include more protection tools for devices connected to IoT? Because as I've mentioned a moment ago, managed IT is something that we invest in heavily at Global 4. We've got a department that's specified to helping our customers with it. But are we seeing businesses starting to include this more for connected devices?
Definitely. There are various levels of protection. People are very well aware of MDM nowadays and how that works. MDM is device dependent though. So I could be a bit dodgy and take the SIM out of that device and go and put it in something else. And it's highly likely that SIM doesn't have any other rules around it.
Yeah.
Especially if you just bought it from the high street and shoved it in, because now it's a consumer SIM. I can just put it in whatever I want, do whatever I want.
Yeah.
If you've got an IoT SIM, you've got an APN, so you've got to know the APN to make it work in the device properly. Great. But the next level is then, okay, I've got my device, I've got MDM around it. What else can I do? So there are protection levels that can be applied from an IoT side, which mean that you apply content filtering to every single one of those four networks that you could join. And you use IWF standards and standardizations so that you can actually block those things, whether it's violence or adult content or gambling or social media or video streaming. Those kinds of things can be put within a list and then blocked from that access. I talked about the children during the pandemic and the Department for Education business that was done. And a lot of that applies in that scenario, because you have to apply those kinds of filters so that you can stop things happening. The amount of hate between children that was going on that may once have been in the playground during COVID was actually via social media instead. But if you are providing a device from the DoV for children for education purposes, you've got to make sure that it's not, there's a safeguarding responsibility that ensures that device has to be secure. You have to make sure that you're not just allowing someone to be able to do that kind of behavior. So yeah, to your question around those protection tools, yeah, you've got your standard MDM, but you've got to think about the other layers to this.
I agree. And I think it really does highlight how IoT SIMs should be considered as part of that company-wide IT strategy and security. We've spoke about how rife cybersecurity is at the moment. So when businesses are looking to roll this out within businesses, it definitely needs to be considered as part of that wider IT strategy. And of course, it's something that we can help with at Global 4. We spoke about our managed IT arm. It's something that we can sit down with our customers and look at, and to make sure it's deployed correctly, it's deployed securely, and most importantly, it's gonna help our customers. So it's not just about obviously connectivity and connecting to the internet. It's about control. It's about compliance. It's about integration with IT. Our last section that we're going to look at is around the future of IoT, because it's massive. I think there was a stat that I read the other week that predicted there's going to be 3.6 billion connections within the next 3 years on IoT, which is huge, because that really does highlight the fact that it's going to be everywhere. You won't be able to walk down the high street without an IoT SIM being next to you. It's going to be absolutely everywhere. So it's important to look at the future and what that means for any of our customers or anybody else who's on the call today. So Jenny, looking ahead, what trends are you seeing that will absolutely shape how businesses use IoT over the next year or two?
So I know I've already mentioned it on a couple of points that we've been through, but the PSTN switch off is absolutely massive. It's forcing businesses like you guys on this call to reconsider future-proofing your traditional connectivity and telecom strategies. So with the enhancements to mobile networks and the introduction of 5G, which we've mentioned, which a lot of the time does reach faster speeds than traditional broadband, and the resiliency of those multi-network SIMs, it's forcing people to really think about whether IoT is a viable solution to replace traditional connectivity. A group of really big hitters at the minute is building entry in intercoms and lift lines, which often are running on outdated technology, and they can be really simply upgraded with an IoT SIM that has voice capabilities. So I think that's a really important one to think about. I'd also like to mention automation and self-serve. So that's a trend that's happening more and more across multiple sectors like retail and hospitality. A couple of examples are like the self-check-ins at your hotels, doctor surgeries, as well as ordering at like fast food establishments and things like that. The technology which can be implemented is actually encouraging a more self-serve environment, which in turn reduces those costs and enables staff to work on things that really matter to the customers.
Really, really good points. And some of the things that I've taken away from what you've said there is the lift lines.
It's huge at the minute.
Absolutely. I don't even want to think of how many lifts are in the UK, but they all need to change, of course, because within a lift, there's an emergency button if you get trapped in there. And historically, that's always ran on the PSTN network, which dates back to the 60s, right? So that needs to change. So for any customers who are on the call today who have any lifts within their sites, absolutely, we can help with a simple replacement of looking at getting that topology changed. If you look at like your red care lines with BT, for example, on the alarm systems, that needs to be changed. There's so much that we probably skip past when we look at IoT because we think it's just to do with the future, when in fact it's to do with stuff that we really, really need to look at changing now. So some really good points there. Thank you, Jenny. And things like eSIMs, smart sensors, have been talked about a lot. Would you say that these concepts are things that businesses should start thinking about now, or can they wait, or how does that look?
So you specifically mentioned smart sensors there. And a really good stat that's like ingrained in my brain now is that there's 10 million smart meters in the UK at the minute with smart sensors inside that obviously enable the data to be gathered and processed. So that's 10 million smart meters that are currently only supporting 2G and 3G. So with the switch off of 2G, 3G, which is happening, going to happen, it's really imperative that anyone depending on that kind of tech starts to replace it. Although they're not always eSIM, but they obviously can be. And I know we've mentioned it throughout the conversation, is payment terminals and the backing up of those terminals. So I'll literally give you a real world example. At the weekend, my local Tesco, the payment terminals went down and they were only taking cash only. So I don't know about you, but I literally never carry cash. I just take my phone. I don't even have a purse. So that's the reason my Sunday dinner ended up being a disaster. But anyway, if you look at how much it would cost any of you guys a day if you couldn't take payments from customers for one day, multiple days. It leads to such a massive loss of revenue, sometimes worth hundreds of thousands a year to businesses if those terminals are online. And it more often than not leads to walkouts. So an IT connectivity SIM as a backup or the primary solution with multi-net capabilities, as we've mentioned, mitigates that loss of revenue. So if a business doesn't have that already, I definitely recommend that people start thinking about that now.
Absolutely. And brand reputation as well. I think we're more inclined to tell our friends, to tell our family about a bad experience that you've had. If you go out for, you've just mentioned Sunday roast. If you go out for a Sunday roast on a Sunday and you have a really bad experience and it's really bad, the food's horrible, and you walk out of there hungry but angry, you're more inclined to probably go and tell your friends about that than when you have a good experience, right? So thinking about what you've mentioned about buying stuff and not being able to buy it, and that kind of brand reputation is huge, isn't it? It's so big. But some really good points there about the kind of concepts that businesses should be thinking about. So I guess really to summarize on the last question for yourself there, Jenny, for anyone who's wanting to stay ahead of the curve, so anybody on the call today who's thinking, well, okay, I should probably start thinking about this for my PDQ machines or as a backup, what's one practical next step they could take after today's session?
The most simple one is to use Global 4. They're your communication experts. They can lean on people like Rich and I to identify that latest technology and the opportunities within any area of the business that can help anyone on this call put you ahead of the competition and keep you at the forefront of whatever your vertical may be. I'll leave you with a stat. So I think it's because it's this year, actually, 2025, there's an estimated 27 billion connected devices globally.
Wow.
So I think that just gives you a bit of food for thought there.
That is huge. It just shows the opportunity, but not only that, it shows what we should be thinking about, right? With these kind of devices. So I guess really to summarize on the future of IoT for myself, if you are a business who have got lift lines, you've got PDQ machines, you've got kind of topologies that are really reliant on the internet, and you've not got something in place, let's just have a conversation. Let's see how we can help. We're not sure if we can help at this stage, but we won't know until we have that conversation, right? So I'd like to now go over to the questions and answers. I have seen a couple coming through. And I'd like to position these questions. So if you do have any burning questions that you just want to get answered, feel free to put them in the chat now. It will be anonymous, so don't worry, and we will be able to answer them as and when we go. Be really interested to see. So let's get the questions up. So give me one momento. Okay, so we've had a question. If I'm opening a new estate agency branch and want everything online from day one, but fiber's delayed, how realistic is it to run core systems like CRM, CCTV, and VoIP purely over IoT SIMs? That is a fantastic question, because I guess it's probably going to be a question that's coming up in a lot of people's minds. When a new technology comes around, how reliant is it going to be for running that site? So, Rich, how reliable would you say it is to run things like CRMs and CCTVs?
Yeah, I'd say how realistic is it to run it? I'd say yes, it is realistic to run it. Probably one caveat, which is around the CCTV bit. If you're constantly streaming in 4K footage or something, then it may be a problem. So I want to know more about the CCTV behavior, because there's a very, very big difference between utilization of data on that. But when you're looking at CRMs, VoIP, things like that, and CCTV as and when it's needed, as opposed to constant streaming, then I wouldn't have a concern about it. And we've got probably a number that we can evidence around that kind of solution out there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Another question. So you mentioned earlier that businesses are using IoT SIMs for things like site rollouts. Do you ever see these SIMs staying in place long term, or are they purely just a stopgap? Let's discuss. What do we think of that? Do we see that as a permanent solution? Is it a trend?
I think, sorry, I saw you were going to speak there, Rich, but I think the biggest thing you should think about with IoT for these kind of rollouts, and it is part of a long-term digital infrastructure. It's not just a stopgap anymore. It's here to stay, and it's going to keep evolving, keep changing, keep moving, and it's definitely something worth investing in.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Would you add anything to that, Rich?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I'd probably ask the business, what do you want it for? And how does it plan as part of your overall map for connectivity? Is there a value to having these there right now, just on the odd chance that something goes down and you've got something you can utilize? And if you're absolutely sure that that isn't the case, then absolutely take it and put it to the next location, bring it to the next location, and give you exactly what you need. I would suggest that the former is probably the right answer more of the time, because that one time something goes down, you've talked about brand damage, you've talked about reputational damage, you've talked about just sheer annoyance of people trying to buy food, buy a coffee, do those normal things. If you haven't got connectivity and you work in retail, it's a real problem. And people don't go to a cash point to take out £10 to come back to buy a coffee. They go to another coffee shop. And I know that's
Yeah,
just one example in one area, but it's a copy and paste example of anything else.
of
So
course.
I would say, yeah, it really, I would be asking that business to really understand their plan for IT, both for emergency failover scenarios, plus also their rollouts.
Fantastic. This is a great question. So, talking about network coverage and having the 4 networks, this question relates to what happens if network coverage is patchy across the board on all 4 networks. So, how well do things run when networks are switched often? So, what do we think in terms of if that is patchy on the 4 networks, Rich, and this network coverage might not be the best across all of it? Is that the kind of solution that the business should be looking at, or should it be something else they should consider?
So it depends. Again, it depends what the device or the requirement at the edge at the location is. Because if you're doing it for payment terminals, if you're doing it for lights of an evening in a residential area for the street light furniture, then the patchiness that we would regard on our mobile phone from the human interaction is less so with a device that's sending a packet of data.
Of course.
So it really depends. It's there's no simple way of going yes no with this. It's not binary in that respect. I think also the device at the edge that you are putting the SIM into has some behaviors that you can apply. So sometimes
Absolutely.
you might say, I want 4G only, I want 5G only, I
Yeah.
want whatever. And that could dismiss some of those connections. So there's never a simple answer for this, but typically a device will stay connected as long as it's got a connection, because that's the best way of transmitting data. To constantly change means that you are interrupting the device because you're forcing the modem to look again for something, and that's stopping the internet connection. So yeah, it really depends what you're connecting. We'd need to ask some more questions around this, so I could tell you the impact against running full streaming 4K CCTV versus PDQ machines and telemetry devices.
Okay. Fantastic. Another question has come in. I will try and get through them all, guys. I'm just conscious of time. So this question states: you talk about IoT being in the cupboard just in case your usual provider goes down, Rich. Why not just use an IoT SIM all the time, or is it too expensive to do that?
You absolutely could. A lot of people are nowadays, because they've worked out that they don't want to pay for an Ethernet line. They don't have a route to getting FTTP or whatever the equivalent is for them. And therefore, they look at it and say, this is the right solution for me to use as a permanent solution going forwards, because I don't have other viable options. And it's definitely cost effective. If you were to buy just an IoT SIM and have it on a metered plan, or a plan, then it probably would be too expensive. But therefore, there are solutions that are built now. These
Okay.
kind of router plus SIM solutions that are specifically built for this kind of always ready scenario. A lot
Fantastic.
of the time, the PSTN switch off has caused us to move to SIM-based technology to deliver that kind of connectivity going forwards. And CCTV typically uses quite a lot of data. So this is the right solution for it as the primary solution.
Fantastic. We've got time for one more. I do really appreciate all of the questions. I'll go through how you can follow up if there's any more questions in a moment, but we've got time for one more in the Q&A. So can IoT SIMs automatically take over in the background if the main broadband fails? Fantastic question. Or would we need to trigger it manually? Rich, does it automatically?
I mean, you could do either, and this again depends on the device at the edge and how you set it up. So some routers, you can set up a behavior within them that says, I will allow option 1 as my connection, my Ethernet connection, and if X amount of time has passed or it's failing to meet this threshold of connectivity, push it over to this. And then obviously the rule needs to be there, which is keep checking this one to make sure I can go back, otherwise you'll stay on the backup.
So of course.
There is a bit of config that needs to be done normally, but that is what you would normally put in place so that you have the automatic failover as opposed to having to do it manually. Obviously, manually is always an option, but someone being up at 2 a.m. to have to fix a CCTV somewhere is not necessarily desirable.
Fantastic. Amazing. So that brings us to the end of today's session. So a massive thank you to Rich and Jenny for their insights in the industry, and most importantly, thank you to the people that have came to attend today. All 37 of you, thank you so much. If anything today really did spark an interest, or it don't really make sense and you do want to find out more, because we do appreciate making that transition can be a little bit daunting, but it's exactly what we're here for. On the page that you're seeing on your screen now, you'll see a link at the bottom. If you copy that and you go down to the bottom, there's a form you can fill out, and one of the team will be in touch as soon as possible. But I'm sure questions will come up off the back end of it. You can find the contact details on the screen. But thank you so much for everyone joining. I hope you have a fantastic rest of the week. And yeah, look out for IoT.